No protests, no yelling. Do not destroy. Just stop buying. Tens of thousands of carpenters across the United States, the builders, roofers, framers, and finishers of other people's dreams, are quietly avoiding Lowe's. Lowe's is not where I buy building materials. Their customer service is terrible. No matter which branch you go to, there are inventory shortages and the system operates poorly. I bought a Whirlpool water heater from Lowe's, and it broke down after only a year. Lowe's didn't offer any support. They just sent a box of spare parts that was missing the most important part. Customer service has severely deteriorated. They don't have experienced staff. The store is messy and cramped with defective or display items. When a consumer complains, it's personal. When tens of thousands of professionals turn their backs, that's a signal. A signal that you shouldn't ignore if you're a homeowner, a DIY enthusiast, or simply a weekend shopper. In this video, we'll also explore the real reasons behind this mass exodus. Does this only affect the price of wood, services, or does it touch something deeper that you've never considered? What do you think made them choose to remain silent instead of protesting publicly? Let's get started. When you hear the phrase, "Tens of thousands of carpenters are boycotting Lowe's," many people probably immediately think of a social media movement. A few angry posts, a couple of fleeting hashtags that disappear. But if you think this is just a virtual wave, you're missing a very real movement that's quietly taking place in the American home renovation industry. First of all, it's important to clarify something. The carpenters in this story are not just carpenters sawing wood in a workshop. It's a human ecosystem standing between Lowe's and you. They are contractors who handle complete home renovations. It's for installing kitchen cabinets, wooden floors, washing machines, and refrigerators. As people who entered the house after everything had been dismantled, when the client was impatient, and when any mistakes would be glaringly obvious. In other words, they are the final link between a massive corporation and the very real lives of consumers. And it is this very group of people who are quietly withdrawing. No banners. There are no protests. There is no press release. Just small, repetitive decisions every day. Sorry, I don't take jobs related to Lowe's. You should buy somewhere else. I don't want to get involved. I can install this. But I'm not responsible if there are any problems. These stories are repeating with alarming frequency. A carpenter walked into the kitchen and found himself to be the fifth person in 8 months. An installer was yelled at by a customer, just because the customer couldn't reach anyone beforehand, and a phrase that appears again and again. They thought I was Lowe's. This is the crucial point that many people overlook. When the system malfunctions, the first to bear the brunt is not the corporation, but the person in the middle. The carpenter doesn't sell shares. They don't have a legal department. They only have personal reputation, which is built with each house, each recommendation, and each handshake. And when that reputation is constantly put at risk by rigid policies, by unfamiliar procedures, by issues they cannot control, the only reasonable reaction is to withdraw to protect themselves. It's important to emphasize, this is not a political movement. It is not an organized boycott. This is pure market behavior, like rushing away from a crack. No one gathered to decide. No one is calling on anyone. But somehow, they made the same choice. And when intermediaries lose trust, the entire ecosystem begins to shake. The question is, if the people directly repairing, installing, and resolving the consequences no longer want to be the go-between for Lowe's and the customer, what will fill that void? If these stories sound familiar to you, or if you've experienced something similar, please share in the comments section. And if you want to follow in-depth analyses like this of the real business, market, and life behind big corporations, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. We'll be digging even deeper. In the next part, we'll delve into why the carpenters themselves were the first to leave, and what within the system pushed them to that decision, step by step, small change by small change, until there was no turning back. When a system begins to crack, the first group to leave is never the one furthest from the problem. It's always the people closest to the breaking point, where all mistakes, delays, and conflicts converge in one place. In Lowe's story, carpenters and installers are that group. They are not the end customers. They are not the management either. They are the human buffer between the corporation and reality. And that very cushion is being eroded from three sides. First party. Lowe's changed its operations but didn't tell anyone. Over the past decade, Lowe's has quietly transformed from a flexible local store model to a highly centralized system. On paper, this is the familiar story of every large corporation, optimizing costs, standardizing processes, and controlling risks. But in real life, this transition is like changing an airplane engine mid-flight without informing the crew. The system is centralized. The process is becoming rigid. All decisions are pushed up to a higher level, making them slower. When there's a problem, the familiar answer echoes every place, from the call center to the store. Company policy doesn't allow it. The problem isn't with that statement. The problem is that no one owns the issue anymore. For carpenters, this is a life-or-death change. They live by their ability to handle situations on the spot. A crooked cabinet door, a machine that won't start, a missing component. All require quick, flexible decisions and someone to take responsibility. When everything is framed by policy, carpenters become messengers, no longer problem solvers. And in the eyes of the customer, the person standing in front of them is always the one who bears the primary responsibility. A system can tolerate delays, but personal reputation doesn't. Second aspect, the 48-hour policy appeared as the final straw. If the operational change was the crack, then the 48-hour policy was the straw that broke the camel's back. Let's stop and imagine a device costing $0 to $500 equivalent to several months of savings for a middle-class family. That equipment needs to be delivered, installed, calibrated, and used in practice to detect errors. 48 hours in that world is not 2 days. For carpenters, this policy creates a dangerous dilemma. If the device develops problems after a few days, which is not uncommon with complex products, who will the customer turn to? Not a hotline, not the manufacturer, but the person who installed it. Here, the carpenter's emotions are very clear, but rarely spoken aloud. 48 hours is not a time limit. That's a refusal to share the risk. And when the risks are not evenly distributed, the weaker party will leave first. That's the law of the market, not an emotional reaction. Third party. Product quality decreases, but responsibility is pushed down to the workers. The picture becomes more complex when placed in the broader context of the modern home appliance industry. Today's products are thinner, lighter, contain more electronics, and have shorter life cycles. This is no secret, but its consequences are not evenly distributed. When a product malfunctions, the system's response usually follows a familiar pattern. The store says it's the manufacturer's fault. The manufacturer says it's due to installation. And the installer, the person in the middle, becomes the recipient of all the pressure. For carpenters, this is a red line. They don't sell the brand. They don't control the production line. The only thing they possess is their personal reputation. That reputation was built over decades, through each project and each recommendation. But just a few cases of errors, not of their making, can erode that reputation faster than you think. And when the cost of risk outweighs the economic benefits, the option to withdraw becomes obvious. These three factors, rigid operations, the 48-hour policy, and declining product quality did not, in themselves, cause the wave of departures. But when combined, they create an environment where carpenters are no longer protected. The question for you is, if you live by your reputation, what would you do in that situation? Stay and hope everything doesn't go wrong, or quietly step aside to protect yourself. If you find these analyses helpful in gaining a clearer understanding of what's happening behind the scenes of major brands, consider subscribing to the channel, not to support a point of view, but to continue delving into the stories that advertising never tells. In the next part, we'll look at it from the consumer's perspective to see that when the carpenter leaves, the impact doesn't stop with them, but spreads directly to your home, wallet, and time. Up to this point, the story might still sound like an internal industry matter. Carpenters, installers, contractors, the people behind the scenes. But this is the most important moment in the entire painting, because when the intermediary group withdraws, the consequences don't stop with them. It slides straight toward the person at the end of the chain. You, not with a big crash, but through a series of small, slowly accumulating setbacks that suddenly take over everyday life. If you are a homeowner, let's start with the most familiar scenario. Home renovation. You sign the contract. The kitchen is being dismantled. And then, everything slowed down. The installation schedule has been postponed. Not just once, but many times. The friend you called didn't have the information. The person with the information doesn't have the right to decide. From a business perspective, this is a coordination issue. But from a life perspective, it's like living in a house suspended in midair, where meals, daily activities, and the rhythm of life are all disrupted. The important thing is, you don't buy a stove separately. You're buying an entire chain of responsibility, from sales, delivery, and installation to troubleshooting. And as the carpenters and installers began to withdraw from that chain, the connecting thread became as thin as dental floss. With just a gentle pull, it will break. Have you ever wondered why some projects don't completely fail, but last long enough to exhaust people? Now, let's move on to a seemingly simpler decision. Buying household appliances, a refrigerator, washing machine, or dryer today is no longer just a purchase and done. They are complex systems that require practical use over time to reveal issues. But in that context, 48 hours was like an hourglass with a hole in the bottom. Before the sand could fall, time was up. When you discover a problem after a few days, you embark on an unadvertised journey, explaining, waiting, proving, and sometimes arguing. At this moment, the feeling isn't anger, but rather being left alone in danger. And it was precisely in that gap that extended warranty packages appeared like a lifeline. No one is forcing you with words. But the context is clear enough for you to understand. If you want peace of mind, you have to pay extra. You don't hate risk. You hate bearing the risk alone while the system stands outside. And if you need repairs or maintenance later, this is the least discussed part, and also the part with the longest-lasting consequences. When the device has problems after a year or two, you go to a local repairman, but more and more fishermen are starting to shake their heads. It's not because they're not skilled enough, and that's because they don't want to be held responsible for products whose history, components, or support policies they can't control. Some parts are missing. Some don't want to be the scapegoat when things go wrong, and so you have the money, but no one to do the work. In the world of home renovation, that's the worst-case scenario. Because when the cameraman turns his back, money won't save you. Time, inconvenience, and stress are what you'll really pay for. These three scenarios are not far-fetched predictions. They are pieces that are appearing sporadically as the middle class begins to withdraw from the system. The question for you is, if the chain of responsibility becomes increasingly broken, what will you do to protect yourself as a homeowner, an equipment buyer, a family? If you find these analyses resonate with your own experiences, consider subscribing to the channel, not to hear more opinions, but to continue following the stories behind seemingly very small decisions in everyday life. In the next part, we'll zoom out to see the bigger picture, to understand that this story isn't just about Lowe's, and that the history of the retail industry has seen very similar cycles. When a major brand begins to lose the trust of professionals, the story is often presented as an unexpected event. But if you look a little broader, the history of the American retail industry shows that this is not new. In reality, it's like an old loop, just with a change of setting and main character. Let's go back a few decades. At that time, Sears was the Lowe's of the 20th century, a symbol associated with the American family, where you can buy everything from washing machines to home repair tools. But as costs were tightened, services standardized, and decisions pushed further away from local stores, Sears gradually lost its most important asset, the layer of intermediaries who understood customers and were willing to step up and handle problems. Revenue didn't plummet immediately, but trust ebbs away little by little, like air escaping from a balloon, slowly, silently, and irrecoverably. Montgomery Ward, or J.C. Penney in the home appliance sector, also followed a similar trajectory, when short-term profit pressures forced them to cut veteran staff, tighten return policies, and shift risk to customers. professionals left first, not by declaration, but through behavior. No longer recommending, no longer prioritizing, no longer associating their name with that product. The common thread in these stories is not the product, nor is it the price. It lies in a structural decision, putting process above people. In every industry with a service component, the intermediary, the mechanic, technician, installer, is the system's shock absorber. While they are there, the system can tolerate errors. When they disappear, every small mistake hits the consumer directly. Without a buffer, it's noteworthy that in most historical cases, brands don't collapse immediately when customers complain. They collapsed when professionals stopped protecting the brand with their personal reputations, and this is what makes Lowe's story disturbingly familiar. The signs weren't on the financial charts, but in very everyday decisions. A carpenter refusing a job, an installer advising customers to buy elsewhere, someone who was once loyal now choosing silence. The question for you is, if history has repeatedly shown what happens when the human buffer layer disappears, what's different this time? Or are we just seeing a new chapter of an old script? In the next part, we'll return to the fairest question in the whole story. Is Lowe's truly losing itself? And what's still keeping them afloat? After all that has been analyzed, from the wave of withdrawing carpenters and controversial policies to operational cracks, a big question began to emerge in the minds of many. Is Lowe's dying? The short answer is no, at least not yet. If you look at the hard metrics of business, Lowe's still stands strong like a large building that hasn't lost its foundation. They have a scale that very few competitors can match. Thousands of stores across the United States. They have a strong enough supply chain to get goods from the factory to your garage in a short amount of time. And equally important, they have brand recognition, a name that has been deeply ingrained in American home improvement culture for generations. But Lowe's current problem isn't concrete, steel, or logistics. It's softer and also more fragile. Lowe's is gradually losing the trust of professionals. The carpenters, installers, and contractors who once acted as shock absorbers for the entire system are no longer willing to take on the risk on behalf of the brand. When that human buffer wears down, every minor collision is transmitted directly to the customer, without any intermediary. This is the current state of Lowe's. It won't collapse, but it's not as smooth as before either. The important question isn't whether Lowe's will survive, but rather, in what form will Lowe's survive? A home improvement store is no longer trusted by contractors. Can it continue to be the place where Americans entrust their biggest life projects? In the next part, we'll move from diagnosis to action. As a consumer, what can you do to protect yourself in this context? After all the analysis, this is a necessary moment to take a step back. Not to judge Lowe's, it's not about choosing sides, and to answer the most practical question. As a consumer, what can you do to protect yourself? First, let's start with a very small but impactful change. Asking questions earlier. Before swiping your card for a renovation project or a major piece of equipment, ask directly, who is the installer? It's not the company name on the invoice, but the person who will actually be coming into your home. Do they work independently or as part of a separate team? If there's a problem, do they have the right to handle it on the spot? This isn't a difficult question, but a lot of people only put it in after the problem has already happened. The next step is something that advertisements rarely mention: reading the return policy before making a purchase. Not just a quick glance, but rather understanding the timeline, conditions, and what will happen if things aren't perfect. A device worth thousands of dollars shouldn't be bought with the mindset of just hoping it will be okay. Hope is not a strategy. Then, allow yourself to compare beyond just the price. Sometimes, a local store, a small chain like Ace Hardware, or a place with its own service team isn't cheaper, but they are often clearer about responsibilities. In the world of home renovation, that clarity is like a map in the fog. It doesn't shorten the journey, but it helps you not get lost. The most important thing is to change the way we view saving. Saving isn't just about the money left over on the bill. It's your time, energy, and peace of mind for months to come. Saving $0 isn't worth it if the price is 6 months of inconvenience, unanswered calls, and feeling trapped in a system where no one takes responsibility? The question I want to leave you with is, next time you're faced with a major home purchase decision, what will you prioritize? The lowest price or a clear enough chain of responsibility to let you sleep soundly? In the final part, we'll conclude this entire story with a broader perspective, not just on Lowe's, but on trust in an era where everything is increasingly optimized. The story of Lowe's, after all, is not just the story of a brand. It's a story about what happens when a system becomes increasingly optimized for numbers, but loses sight of the people on the front lines, the ones who keep things running smoothly in real life. Tens of thousands of carpenters did not leave in anger. They left in silence. And in business, silence is often the most worrying sign. The question I want to leave you with is, if you are someone who lives by your reputation, would you stay in a system that no longer protects you? Or would you move on? And as a consumer, have you ever felt that disconnect in your own experience? Please share your perspective or story in the comments section. If you're interested in analyses that are slower than the news, but go deeper than the surface on business, markets, and the very real impacts on life, consider subscribing to the channel, not to hear more conclusions, but to ask important questions together before the market answers them for us. The content in this video is compiled from public sources, independent analysis, and market trend observations with the aim of providing information and facilitating discussion. The video does not represent any organization, brand, or individual, and is not intended to provide financial or legal advice. All purchasing or investment decisions should be made based on your own circumstances and personal assessment. Thank you for watching until the end. See you in the next videos.